Hello, story lovers. Before we dive into this tale of quiet power and ultimate retribution, please take a moment to like this story, subscribe for more content, and comment below with your thoughts on family, legacy, and the true meaning of strength. Your engagement helps bring these worlds to life. Now, settle in. The invitation was an anomaly, a ghost from a life Rhea Langford had meticulously interred. It arrived not in the crisp, embossed envelope of her parents' choosing, bearing the weight of a summons, but in a soft, lilac-hued paper that felt fragile in her hands. The stationery was a testament to her family's wealth, thick and creamy as clotted cream, with the Langford family crest, a stoic, unblinking griffin watermarked into the grain. But the handwriting that flowed across its surface was not the severe, judgmental script of her father, the retired federal Judge Alastair Langford, nor the looping, performative calligraphy of her mother, Eleanor. It was the careful, still-developing cursive of her niece, Lily. "Aunt Rhea," it began, the letters earnest and a little shaky. "Grandma says it's a very important dinner for Uncle Nathan, but it won't be any fun without you. Please come. I miss you. Love, Lily." Rhea traced the name with the tip of her index finger. 5 years. It had been 5 years, 3 months, and 11 days since she had last set foot inside the stone fortress of her family's ancestral home. 5 years since she had voluntarily subjected herself to the unique and suffocating atmosphere of Langford judgment, an environment where her life's work was treated as a quaint, slightly embarrassing hobby. As the state attorney general, Rhea commanded the respect of governors, law enforcement agencies, and the very legal system her father once presided over with an iron gavel. She managed a department of hundreds, oversaw investigations that could topple corporations, and argued cases that shaped state law. Her days were a whirlwind of precise language, unassailable logic, and the immense, crushing weight of public trust. She navigated this world with a composure so absolute it was often mistaken for a lack of passion. But it was control. A lifetime of learning to wall off the messy, unpredictable tides of emotion had forged her into a formidable instrument of the law. To her family, however, she was still just Rhea, the peculiar daughter who had eschewed the gilded path of corporate law or a lucrative partnership for the thankless, messy, and in their eyes, decidedly middle-class pursuit of public service. Government work was what one did when one lacked the finesse for real power, the kind that was brokered in boardrooms and on golf courses, not in sterile courthouses. It was, as her father had once declared during their last fight, a profession for the earnest but unremarkable. It was beneath a Langford. Her brother, Nathan, was the embodiment of what a Langford was supposed to be. A corporate lobbyist with a 1,000-watt smile and a soul made of transactional handshakes, he moved through the world with the unearned confidence of a man who had never been told no. He called what he did wielding real power, whispering in the right ears, shaping policy from the plush leather of a private club. He bragged about it endlessly, his success a constant, implicit rebuke of her own path. This dinner, the invitation explained in Lily's careful script, was to celebrate Nathan's latest triumph, an appointment as a special advisor to a congressional oversight committee. Rhea knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a professional who smelled corruption the way a shark smells blood, that the position had not been earned. It had been purchased, a bauble acquired through a series of backroom deals and strategically deployed family funds. It was a perversion of the very system she had sworn an oath to protect. Her first instinct was to burn the invitation, to let the lilac paper curl into black ash and scatter it to the wind, a final, definitive severing. She had built a life, a fortress of her own, far from their corrosive influence. She did not need their approval. She did not need their world. But then she thought of Lily, a bright, curious girl trapped in that museum of aristocratic expectations. In a family that valued appearances above all else, Lily's affection was the only genuine currency. Rhea remembered the little girl's wide, questioning eyes, her fascination with Rhea's work, asking questions no one else in the family ever bothered to. "Do you really put bad guys in jail, Aunt Rhea? Is it scary?" For 5 years, she had protected herself by staying away. But in doing so, she had left Lily alone in that suffocating environment, with only Nathan's hollow ambition and her grandparents' cold disappointment as models for adulthood. The handwritten plea was not just an invitation. It was a lifeline thrown from a gilded cage. Rhea placed the invitation on her uncluttered desk, next to a stack of legal briefs bound in formal blue covers. For a long moment, she stared at the two objects, the tangible proof of the world she had built and the fragile missive from the world she had fled. The decision, when it came, was not born of anger or a desire for confrontation. It was a simple, quiet calculation, a duty not to her family but to the one small person within it who deserved better. She would go, not for them, not for their celebration of a corrupt victory, purely for her niece. She would endure it, a final act of familial obligation, and then she would retreat back into her own life, the door sealed for good. She owed Lily that much. The Langford estate was not a house, it was a declaration. Perched on a hill overlooking the city, its stone facade seemed to push back against the sky, timeless and arrogant. The long, winding driveway was flanked by ancient oaks that formed a cathedral-like canopy, their branches interwoven like the fingers of praying hands. As Rhea's sensible, state-issued sedan crunched over the pristine gravel, it felt like an intrusion, a drab sparrow in a flock of peacocks. Gleaming Bentleys and silver-gray Merceds were parked in a neat, ostentatious row, their polished surfaces reflecting the twilight. She had deliberately chosen to arrive late, hoping to slip in during the cocktail hour, find Lily, and become a part of the wallpaper. She had also deliberately chosen her attire. In a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, she wore what she might wear to a late-night strategy session at the office: a pair of tailored black trousers, a simple silk shell, and a sharply cut blazer. It was professional, impeccable, and utterly civilian. It was a statement of otherness. The heavy oak doors swung open before she could touch them, pulled by a uniformed steward who looked at her with polite, practiced neutrality. The sound washed over her first, the high-pitched murmur of privileged conversation, the crystalline clink of champagne flutes, the distant, melancholic notes of a hired string quartet playing something by Vivaldi. The air smelled of money, a cloying blend of expensive perfume, hothouse lilies, and the faint beeswax scent of polished wood. The grand foyer was a cavern of marble and dark mahogany. A sweeping staircase, carpeted in a deep crimson runner, ascended to the second floor. Her family and their guests were gathered in the main drawing room to the left, a glittering constellation of jewels and self-satisfaction. Rhea paused in the arched doorway, her eyes scanning the crowd. She saw them immediately. Her father, Alistair, stood by the massive stone fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his posture as rigid and unyielding as a statue. He was listening to another man, a senator whose campaign had been generously funded by Langford-adjacent interests, nodding slowly, his face a mask of judicial gravitas. He saw her. His eyes, the same cool gray as her own, flickered over her for a fraction of a second. There was no warmth, no welcome, just a fleeting, almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw before he turned back to his conversation. An acknowledgement of a logistical fact: Rhea has arrived, nothing more. Her mother, Elinor, was holding court near the bay window, a vision in emerald silk, her neck and wrists draped in diamonds that caught the light and fractured it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. She was laughing, a tinkling melodic sound that never quite reached her eyes. She was talking to Rhea's cousins, two women who had married into even greater wealth and produced perfect, photogenic children. Elinor spotted her, and her smile faltered for a beat, a micro-expression of social inconvenience. But it was Nathan who approached first. He moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of a shark, a half-empty glass of wine in his hand, his face flushed with triumph and alcohol. His tuxedo was exquisitely tailored, his smile a weapon of condescending charm. He stopped a few feet from her, letting the silence stretch, ensuring he had the attention of those nearby. His voice, when he spoke, was loud enough to carry. "Nice of you to show up, counselor. Did they let you out of traffic court early?" A ripple of sycophantic laughter spread through the immediate circle. It was an old, tired barb, one he had been using for years, but it still served its purpose: to frame her as small, her work as insignificant, to reduce the state attorney general to a glorified public defender in a provincial courthouse. Rhea did not react. She kept her expression neutral, her hands loosely at her sides. She had learned long ago that to show a wound in this family was to invite them to pour salt in it. Her stillness was her shield. Her mother, sensing an opportunity to reinforce the family narrative, drifted over, her smile now back in place, thin and sharp as a shard of glass. "Oh, darling," Elinor said, her voice a silken purr of disapproval. We were so worried. We thought you might have been held up with something important." She paused for effect, letting her eyes sweep over Rhea's simple attire. She's always had such ambition, just none of the charisma to go with it. More laughter, this time a little more confident, a little more cruel. They were a pack, sensing weakness, enjoying the spectacle of the errant cub being put back in its place. Rhea felt the familiar, cold knot tightening in her stomach. It was the feeling of being 13 again, standing in this very room, being told her report card was commendable for a girl, but not quite Langford standard. It was the feeling of being 22, announcing her decision to join the DA's office and watching her father's face close like a vault door. She did not respond. Not yet. She let their words hang in the air, let the laughter fade into the Vivaldi. She met her mother's gaze, then her brother's, holding it for a beat longer than was comfortable. She let them see the flat, unreadable surface of her composure. She would not give them the satisfaction of a fight. She would not let them dictate the terms of engagement. Then a small hand slipped into hers. Rhea looked down. Lily stood beside her, looking up with wide, serious eyes. She was wearing a velvet dress the color of a midnight sky, and in her presence the entire glittering, hostile room seemed to recede. "I'm glad you came, Aunt Rhea," Lily whispered, her grip tightening. Rhea's composure, the carefully constructed dam, held firm. But behind it, a small, warm current of relief flowed through her. She squeezed her niece's hand gently. "Me too," she said, her voice quiet but clear. The moment was broken by the chime of a bell, signaling that dinner was served. The herd of guests began to move towards the dining room, their chatter resuming its confident hum. Nathan shot her one last smirk, a look that said this isn't over, before turning to lead the procession, the man of the hour. Rhea watched him go, a slow, cold resolve beginning to form in the pit of her stomach. She had come for Lily. But now, she realized, this evening might have to serve another purpose entirely. The dining room was the heart of the Langford Empire's oppressive grandeur. A single, colossal mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, stretched down its length, capable of seating 30. Above it, a pair of crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the scene below. The table was a battlefield of etiquette, laid with a dizzying array of silverware, porcelain plates bearing the family crest, and crystal glasses for water, red wine, and white wine. Rhea was seated, as if by calculated design, at the far end of the table, a geographical representation of her status within the family. She was placed between a distant, ancient aunt who was mostly deaf and a young, vapid heir to a shipping fortune who spent the entire first course scrolling through his phone beneath the table. The arrangement was a clear signal. She was present, but not a participant, an observer on the periphery. She ate sparingly, moving through the courses with the mechanical precision of someone performing a familiar, joyless task. The food was exquisite, of course. A delicate lobster bisque, a perfectly seared filet mignon, a succession of wines that cost more per bottle than her monthly grocery bill. It was all lost on her. Each bite tasted of resentment. Each sip of wine tasted of compromise. The conversation around her was a symphony of self-congratulation. They spoke of acquisitions and mergers, of wintering in Gstaad and summering in the Hamptons, of political shifts that would be marvelous for the market. It was a language she understood but no longer spoke. Her world was one of statutes and precedents, of evidence and due process. Theirs was a world of loopholes and influence. At the head of the table, Nathan was incandescent. He held court, laughing, telling anecdotes that painted him as a cunning, indispensable player in the great game of power. His father, Alistair, watched him with a look Rhea had never once received, unequivocal pride. The cold, judicial mask had been replaced by the warm, indulgent face of a patriarch pleased with his heir. Elinor beamed, refilling Nathan's glass, her every gesture a testament to her son's success. After the main course was cleared, Alistair tapped a silver spoon against his crystal glass, the clear, ringing sound cutting through the chatter. A hush fell over the room. "Friends, family," he began, his voice the deep, resonant baritone that had once commanded courtrooms. "We are gathered tonight to celebrate a significant milestone. My son, Nathan, has been called to serve. He has been appointed as a senior advisor to the Congressional Committee on Economic Oversight." A polite, then enthusiastic round of applause filled the room. Rhea did not clap. She simply watched, her hands resting in her lap, her face a carefully blank canvas. Alistair continued, It is a position of immense trust and influence, a role where one can truly shape the direction of this country. It is the continuation of a legacy of service, albeit in the private-public sphere where true change is often forged. The subtle dig was not lost on Rhea, private-public sphere, the world of lobbyists and consultants, true change. As opposed to the false, insignificant change she pursued, he raised his glass. To my son, Nathan, may his wisdom guide him. To Nathan. The room echoed the toast. To Nathan, Nathan rose, basking in the adulation. He let the applause die down, a practiced, humble smile playing on his lips. Thank you, Father. Thank you, everyone. It's truly an honor. He looked around the table, his eyes sweeping over the faces of the powerful and wealthy, his peers. He was one of them. He belonged. He spoke for several minutes, a rambling, self-aggrandizing speech about common-sense solutions and cutting through bureaucratic red tape. It was a speech full of meaningless corporate jargon, designed to sound important without saying anything at all. Then, his eyes found Rhea, sitting in the twilight at the far end of the table. A cruel, playful glint entered his gaze. He was not finished. The performance required a final act. He raised his glass again. And I want to give a special thanks, he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity, to my family for always supporting me, for raising someone who they knew could become. Well, actually important. A few nervous chuckles. It was a step too far even for this crowd, but Nathan was too drunk on his own ego to notice. He zeroed in on his sister, his smile widening. And to my dear sister Rhea, he said, his voice booming in the suddenly quiet room. Her name on his lips sounded like an accusation. He paused, letting every eye in the room turn to her. Your little law school degree finally came in handy, huh? The dam broke, not outwardly. Outwardly, Rhea remained perfectly still. But inside, a 5-year wall of carefully managed restraint, of practiced indifference, of silent, dignified distance, crumbled into dust. The laughter that followed was explosive. It was not the polite tittering from before. It was a raw, unrestrained roar of ridicule. They laughed at the absurdity of it, the perfect, cutting insult. They laughed at her, the serious, sullen woman in the plain clothes, finally put in her place by the golden boy. Her entire career, her oath, her title, every long night and every hard-won case, all of it reduced to a footnote in his story. A handy little degree that had somehow, laughably, contributed to his grand ascent. Her father did not stop him. He smiled, a thin, approving line. Her mother laughed the loudest, her diamond earrings trembling with her mirth. In that moment, Rhea felt nothing. The hurt was so deep, so absolute, that it transcended pain and became a vast, cold emptiness. A void. And in that void, a single, crystalline thought formed. Enough. She did not shout. She did not weep. She did not throw her wine in his face. Slowly, deliberately, Rhea Langford folded her linen napkin and placed it beside her plate. She pushed her chair back, the sound of its legs scraping against the polished floor a jarring screech in the lingering echo of laughter. She stood. Heads turned. The laughter died in their throats, replaced by a confused curiosity. Rhea looked down the long table, her gaze sweeping over their faces, the smugness, the cruelty, the indifference. Her eyes met her brother S for a fleeting second. His face was a mask of triumphant scorn. Then she turned to her mother. If you'll excuse me, she said, her voice a low, level murmur devoid of any emotion at all. Without another word, without a backward glance, she turned and walked out of the dining room. Her steps were measured, unhurried. Each footfall on the marble floor of the foyer was a silent, echoing vow. The great oak doors closed behind her with a soft, final click, leaving a room full of stunned silence in her wake. They thought she was fleeing. They thought she was broken. They were wrong. She was merely preparing for battle. The 15 minutes that followed were a study in transformation. Rhea did not retreat to her car to weep or fume. She walked to her state-issued sedan with the focused, purposeful stride of a soldier heading for the armory. The night air was cool against her skin, a welcome antidote to the suffocating heat of the dining room. She opened the trunk. Lying inside, meticulously prepared, was a garment bag. She had brought it on a whim, a half-formed contingency plan filed away in the back of her mind, a just-in-case, born of years of knowing her family's capacity for cruelty. Now it was no longer a contingency. It was a necessity. With practiced efficiency, she unzipped the bag. Inside hung the full, formal uniform of the state attorney general. It was a uniform of power, but not the kind her family understood. It was not the power of wealth or connections. It was the power of the people, of the law, vested in her office. She stripped off her blazer, her silk shell, the civilian clothes that had marked her as an outsider, a lesser entity. She let them fall onto the passenger seat. She then began to dress, not as Rhea Langford, the disappointing daughter, but as Attorney General Langford. The crisp, white shirt, the perfectly pressed dark blue jacket, its fabric heavy with authority. She buttoned it, her movements precise and economical. She affixed the official insignia to her collar, the polished gold catching the faint light from the house. She clipped her badge to her breast pocket, its weight a familiar, comforting pressure against her heart. It was a shield forged not of steel, but of integrity. Next came the ribboned credentials, a colorful testament to her service and honors. She arranged them neatly, each bar representing a battle fought and won in the service of a principle they would never understand. This wasn't a costume, it was her skin. It was the truth of who she was made visible. As she adjusted her uniform, she took out her phone. She dialed a single number. It was answered on the first ring. "Execute," she said, her voice calm and clear. No further explanation was needed. The team had been on standby for a week, ever since she'd received the final piece of evidence. The investigation into Nathan's appointment was no longer just a file on her desk. It was now active, live. She ended the call and took one deep, steadying breath. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the car window. The woman looking back was not the one who had walked out of that dining room. The hurt was gone, replaced by a cold, righteous certainty. The emotional restraint she had cultivated for a lifetime was no longer a defense mechanism. It was now a weapon. She walked back to the great oak doors of the house. This time she did not wait for the steward. She pushed them open herself. The doors swung inward with a low, sonorous groan, announcing her arrival. Everyone turned. The murmur of confused conversation, which had started up again in her absence, was sliced in half. It fell away into a sudden, cavernous silence. The room, which had seemed so large and intimidating before, now felt small. The chandeliers, the mahogany, the portraits of stern-faced ancestors, it all seemed like a theatrical backdrop for the scene that was about to unfold. Rhea walked in. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. In her civilian clothes, she had been invisible. In her uniform, she was the only thing in the room. It radiated an authority that eclipsed every iota of their inherited wealth and manufactured status. The tuxedos looked like cheap costumes, the pearls and diamonds like gaudy trinkets. Dead silence. Her father, Alistair, the retired federal judge, was the first to understand. A flicker of something, not fear, but a dawning, horrified comprehension, passed across his face. He knew what that uniform signified. It was the state. It was the law in corporeal form, walking into his private sanctuary. Rhea's gaze did not waver. She walked past the gawking guests, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. She walked past her mother, whose face was a frozen mask of disbelief, her wine glass held halfway to her lips. She walked the entire length of that impossibly long dining table, a slow, deliberate procession. Her destination was the head of the table, where her brother, Nathan, still stood, his face a comical mixture of confusion and drunken belligerence. She stopped directly in front of him. She was close enough to see the sweat beading on his upper lip. The room was so quiet she could hear the frantic, thumping beat of her own heart, steady and strong. She looked him directly in the eye. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the silent room, as clear and sharp as breaking ice. "Actually," she said, "I outrank everyone in this room." From an inner pocket of her jacket, she produced a single, sealed envelope. It was plain, white, official. It looked impossibly stark against the opulent backdrop of the dinner table. She held it out to him. Nathan stared at it, then at her, his bravado finally evaporating, replaced by a creeping, naked fear. His hand trembled as he reached for it. "Your position," Rhea stated, her voice flat, professional, and utterly devoid of personal animosity, "was acquired illegally." The words landed like stones in the silent room. "There's an open investigation into bribery of a public official and conspiracy to defraud the United States government." Gasps rippled through the room. A fork clattered onto a plate, the sound as loud as a gunshot. Somewhere in the back, the flash of a phone camera went off, a silent digital witness. She placed the envelope on the table in front of him, next to his celebratory glass of wine. The contrast was stark, the symbol of his false triumph next to the proof of his true crime. "That is a subpoena to appear before a grand jury," she continued, her tone as clinical as a surgeon's report. "You're advised to retain counsel." She had stripped him bare. not with a shout but with a sentence. She had dismantled his entire world, not with emotion but with the cold, hard, inescapable truth of the law. She looked from Nathan's ashen face to her father. Alistair looked broken, the legacy he so cherished crumbling into dust before his eyes. She then looked at her mother, who was staring at her as if she were a stranger, a terrifying apparition. Rhea gave them a single, polite nod. It was not an act of forgiveness or reconciliation. It was a gesture of finality, a dismissal. She turned and walked toward the door. A small figure darted out from the side. It was Lily. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. She reached out and took Rhea's hand. Rhea's fingers closed around her niece's. It was the only warmth in the glacial room. Together, the Attorney General and the little girl walked out of the house, leaving behind a tableau of shattered pride and the deafening sound of silence. The fallout was not a storm, but a quiet, seismic shock that fractured the foundations of the Langford dynasty. News of the subpoena, served by the state attorney general to her own brother at a private family dinner, leaked online before the guests had even found their coats. A grainy phone picture, showing Rhea in her uniform standing over her pale-faced brother, became a viral sensation. The caption was always the same: "Power interrupted." The story was irresistible, a tale of family drama, political corruption, and a woman who refused to be underestimated. The press, smelling blood, descended. They painted Rhea not as a vindictive sister, but as a figure of unimpeachable integrity, a public servant who placed her oath above family ties. They called her the Iron Attorney, Langford's Law. Her parents' names appeared on her phone screen late that night, one after the other. Father, mother. The calls were frantic, desperate. She imagined their voices, a mixture of rage and pleading. She imagined their demands that she fix this, that she make it all go away, that she remember her duty to the family name. Rhea sat in the quiet of her apartment, the city lights twinkling outside her window. She looked at the ringing phone. She felt a flicker of the old pain, the ghost of the little girl who had so desperately wanted their approval. Then she set the phone down, screen side down, and let it ring until it fell silent. She never called them back. Her silence was the only answer they would ever get. She would not engage. She would not explain. She would not gloat. The act itself was the entire conversation. Rhea never spoke about that night again, not to her staff, not to the press, not to anyone. Her work continued, precise and unwavering. But a message had been sent, and it had been received. The family and the world they inhabited never mocked her again. They spoke of her now in hushed, respectful tones, with a healthy dose of fear. Nathan, facing an indefensible federal case, resigned from his advisory position in quiet disgrace. His name vanished from the headlines, his career in Washington over before it began. The scandal was contained, but the damage to the Langford legacy was permanent. The pristine veneer had been stripped away, revealing the rot beneath. Years passed. Rhea continued her work, her reputation for integrity becoming legendary. She was a fixed point of principle in a shifting political landscape. One afternoon, she sat in the back of a crowded courtroom, a spectator for the first time in years. At the plaintiff's table stood a young woman, her voice clear and strong, her arguments sharp and passionate. She was fighting for a group of tenants who were being illegally evicted by a wealthy developer. She spoke of justice, of fairness, of the law as a shield for the powerless. The young woman was Lily. She had followed in her aunt's footsteps, not into the sterile world of corporate law her family would have preferred, but into the trenches of civil rights. As Lily finished her closing argument, her eyes scanned the courtroom and found Rhea's. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a shared look of understanding and respect. In that moment, Rhea felt a pride so profound it almost took her breath away. It was a pride her father had never shown her, a sense of legacy he could never comprehend. She had not destroyed her family's legacy that night. She had replaced it. She had torn down a monument to corrupt, inherited privilege, and in its place had helped nurture something real, something vital, something good. Rhea Langford had walked into that dinner as the family's greatest disappointment. She had walked out as its undeniable center of gravity. She didn't need to shout or scream or fight for their respect. She had simply arrived, dressed in truth, and in the devastating silence that followed, she had taken it back. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If Rhea's story of silent strength and earned respect resonated with you, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the channel for more powerful narratives, and leaving a comment below. What did you think of her method of revenge? We'd love to hear from you.